Hello, everyone. Alicia, thank you for joining me today. Alicia is one of our therapists here at Masters Counseling. She is a certified Canadian counselor. My name is Matthew. I have the privilege of being a part of the admin team here at Masters. I'd love to just introduce you a little bit. Why don't you just share with us some of the types of clients that you work with?
Yeah, so I do work with a lot of teens, but I also sometimes work with some younger children. So I usually see anywhere between six and up. And so anywhere from six to sometimes 60. So there's a really huge range of people that I see. I would say that the bulk of my clients are usually between maybe 12, 13, and 25. So kind of in that young adult adolescent range there.
And just jumping straight into the first question that I have for you is, teen anxiety and depression. I think statistically and culturally we know this, but they're at an all-time high. I'm just curious, from your perspective, what do you feel is making life so overwhelming for our young people these days?
Yeah, so a lot of things. I do not envy people being teenagers in this day and age, actually. But that being said, I think there's so many things you can do to make it better. I just do think that there are a lot of stressors and obstacles that are sort of thrown at teenagers these days. The one that really comes to mind that I think of first is having access to social media, having access to media in general. And I think that teenagers now have more access to information than any other generation has before them. So even say like the millennial generation, they grew up kind of in the 80s and 90s where there wasn't a phone in your pocket or there wasn't social media, there wasn't that much access to information. And so yeah, I think a lot of teens see social media as a way to have a social life, but it also gives them back all of this information. It gives them back information on how other teenagers are living. The problem with that is highlight reels. And so it's
Mm,
very select information that is being given to them, just enough for them to be able to kind of compare themselves to what other people are doing and feel this disparity between my life and someone else's life who is an influencer making money off of social media and doing all these really cool looking things. So, yeah.
so, I hear almost so technology is great. I think, like we're connecting via
Mm,
technology right now.
yeah,
What I hear you
exactly.
saying is there's kind of two downsides to it. One is we're almost always or even chronically aware of some of the things that are going on in the world,
Yeah.
maybe the negative things, the things that could be perceived as threats. But then there's
Hmm.
also this other aspect of this, there's this continuous opportunity of comparison. And we're not
Hmm.
comparing our life to another person's ordinary life. We're comparing our circumstance to what we see as the highlight reel of other people's lives.
Yeah, definitely. And usually those lives are they're the 1% of
Mm,
teens and young adults that are living that way. But because that's all you've grown up in, they only see it as, well, that's what I should be now. That's what my life should look like. And I'm just living such a plain, ordinary, disappointing now. And they don't always see that like ordinary is the average.
right. And so how does that lead to, for a layman, non-therapist perspective, there's
Mhm.
comparison or there's the perceived sense of fear. How does that lead to things like anxiety and depression, which can be considered disorders? What's the connection there?
Yeah. So I think when you are comparing yourself to somebody, they say comparison is a thief of joy. I think
Mm,
that when you are looking kind of through this lens, through this perspective of my life is inadequate, my life doesn't have what this person has, then you're looking at, data and information around you that confirms that bias. And that's what we call like a negative bias. And so you could start looking for that, say at school, if you just think you're inadequate, if you don't think you're good enough, you see your friends talking amongst each other and not talking to you, you automatically assume, well, I'm inadequate. So they're probably talking about my inadequacies, probably talking about how I'm just not good enough or I'm lame. Yeah, and then you start to see that even, in the world, people give you a side glance, and with anxiety, you interpret the whole world through this lens of anxiety. And the more that you focus on something, the more you see it. So it kind
Wow.
of becomes a feedback. Yeah.
That's really interesting. You've already it's a good segue into our second question. You've already kind of spoken to it a little bit, but we talk about technology, but specifically social media. It's become central to all of our lives, but really
Mm.
also teenagers' lives.
Yeah.
How do you think this is shaping their sense of self? And how is it impacting their ability to have relationships?
Yeah, I mean, their sense of self, I kind of see it as almost creating like a false, like I kind of said before, like a false sense of reality. Food videos are edited and well done on social media to look really good. And so there's this expectation that your food has to look a certain way. And then there's this expectation of other people taking vacations and really luxurious
Mm,
trips. That, oh, I need to take those trips and
right.
have the money to spend on that. Or a lot of influencers don't work a 9 to 5. And so then they're like, well, what's wrong with me if that's my path in life? And in terms of relationships, I think that you can obviously like build relationships on social media. You can stay connected with your friends, but I almost wonder if it creates a bit of like a false sense of intimacy and depth
Mm,
where you think you're connecting, you think you're looking at your friend's life and you think that you're sending them funny videos and you guys can have a laugh about it. But I think that doesn't make up for having quality and depth of relation. I feel from so many people now, like I'm experiencing loneliness or I'm experiencing, a lack of community, lack of good friends around me. Everyone has social media. So if we all were able to make friends out of social media, we'd all have, no problem not feeling lonely. But a lot of teens, especially, and young people are feeling especially lonely now, even though we can be the most connected that we've ever been.
fascinating. That's a very profound observation you make there. We're more connected than we ever have been, but we're also potentially more lonely than we ever have been. Wow. I segue into maybe my next question, which is I don't think this is unique to just teenagers. I think a lot of young people are feeling lost. I hear this a lot when I'm chatting with people. They feel lost when it comes to their future or their purpose or their identity. Why do you think this is becoming? Well, actually, I have a first question. Do you think that this is becoming more common? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think in a way it could be more common only because I always like to think of differences between generations. I get very hyper fixated on that sometimes. And I think of, say, that generation, like the boomers, where they sort of had a path set before them. It didn't seem like people deviated too far from the norm. You kind of went to school,
Mhm.
did your 4 years, came out a teacher, came out a nurse, or, whatever it was, and they just got to work. They didn't kind of fiddle around as much. But I think in this day and age, we have, first of all, so many options. And with going back to social media and data that we have access to, we kind of see all these options. So I think that could
Right,
probably be pretty overwhelming of, I don't know what to pick because it's decision fatigue at this point. I
right.
have too many options.
Mhm.
So some kids or adults even, maybe they tap out for a bit because they're just overwhelmed by the amount of choices.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's a ton of pressure now. I've heard from kids saying, like, I have to get 98s in every subject across the board. And there's this huge pressure now in academia to have these insane grade averages and to
Wow.
just to get it basic university.
Wow.
Uh, And there's probably like other reasons, that that's happening, maybe like beyond the scope of therapy. I'll kind of leave that out of this today. But I think that there's now this new pressure of I need to get this grade point average, otherwise I'm not going to get into any school of my choice because the programs are so packed and in such high demand now. Because it's so much more accessible, I think, for this generation to go to university, to go to school,
Right.
but that comes with more competition. So that could be part of the issue.
Well, and there's also so many non-traditional options now. I
Yeah.
connect with a lot of young people who they want to start their own business, and that's awesome. But they have very minimal business experience, and like, okay, wow, like so you're gonna have to learn a lot uh,
Mm.
on top of just simply whatever the trade is that you're doing. That's a lot of extra pressure and stress to get to that place of looking successful. You talk about pressure. I think we can all agree that there's just a lot of pressure on teenagers. I mean, I think we're
Mm.
all experiencing pressure these days, but specifically, there's a lot of pressure on teenagers. So, school, social life, career paths. Do you think that teenagers are just expecting too much of themselves? Do you think they're just expecting, yeah, they're just putting too much pressure on themselves?
I would definitely see that a lot. I see a lot of teens kind of stressing themselves out, and they don't have parents that are over their shoulder demanding that they get the best grades or get their
Right.
extracurriculars done. There's no demands from parents in these kids, but these kids expect so much of themselves.
Where is that coming from? Yeah.
It's such a good question. I think it's different for everybody, but for some of the cases I've worked with, it kind of trails back to this really core belief of I'm going to fail or I'm not going to be good
Mm,
enough
mm,
and I'm not going to have what it takes
mm.
to achieve or accomplish what I need to accomplish. And I almost wonder, this is kind of me just spitfiring right now, but
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder if they haven't faced enough life challenges themselves yet to really have that confidence and that resilience
Mm,
system to say, yeah, I can achieve this. I can do what it takes. Like, I'm
right,
still going to get that really high grade point average without completely having a mental breakdown in the
right.
midst of it. Yeah.
That's I mean, and I know you're probably connecting with people who are struggling with some of these thoughts in the sort of therapy room, and or what are some of the things that you're supporting individuals? You're just feeling that overwhelming sense of pressure.
Yeah. I think the first thing is to just sort of normalize it and not say, like, this is an
Mm,
issue. This isn't the end of the world. You're not crazy for thinking this. You're not crazy for having these thoughts or these beliefs. There's always a root to them. There's always a
mm,
core, like a root cause to why you're thinking this way. And typically it goes back to even sometimes early childhood. Maybe there are instances where these individuals felt like, okay, I now need to prove myself because I don't feel adequate. I don't feel good enough. Or it can even kind of come from, something that was said to them by a teacher, by a mentor, by a parent, older sibling, something like that. Or it kind of also goes back to comparison too. I know some clients have older siblings and they're like, well, this older sibling is doing such amazing things and I'm still in high school and I got to keep up with them. Otherwise, I'm a
right.
loser.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's strong language to, say you're a loser, but really that comparison piece really can put a lot of pressure on people,
Yeah.
especially when they're at two different states of life.
Very, very different. Like you haven't even been given the opportunity to challenge yourself or rise to the occasion yet.
Yeah.
You're still in the training season. So,
I think back to when I was a teenager and like teenage years, I'm an adult and I'm still experiencing new things for the first time. And I recognize that when I go through an experience that's new to me, I recognize that that's emotionally exhausting. And that's adult language that I have. But back in the day, that would have just been like stressful or I wouldn't even have had words to explain how that would have felt back in those days. There's so much going on in a teenager's brain. There's biological changes. There's so much other stuff that's going on. How do you help people process through some of those new experiences that they're trying to understand?
yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is learning self compassion
Mm,
in the midst of dealing with that. So, when I say like loser, yeah, it sounds strong, but that's how we talk to ourselves a lot of the time,
it
is
is.
very critical, harsh talk. And so after filtering through all this, like, what is your self-talk like? And some people are like, what is self-talk? It's just how you talk to yourself without being aware, like what's going on, what's the dialogue in your head? Are you very kind to yourself? Or are you kind of like this critical, authoritative parent or a bully, you know,
Mhm.
beating you down? And yeah, so coming from approach of self-compassion instead of
Wow.
self-judgment is usually a way to start kind of bringing clarity and new thinking to a client.
That's a powerful observation. We really need to have more self compassion for ourselves, recognizing the negative statements we're making about ourselves and then applying self compassion. I think you'd be the first one to say that doesn't just apply to teenagers. I think that applies to a lot of us adults as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to change the topic quite significantly, and I want to speak to some training that you've recently done in the area of what's called EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I'd love just a quick, brief intro as what exactly is EMDR and how is it used to help people that are processing through difficult experiences?
Yeah. So it usually focuses on traumatic memories or even disturbing experiences that people have had in their past.
Mm,
Oftentimes, we get these core negative beliefs about ourselves based on these situations, based on these experiences. And oftentimes, when a traumatic experience or memory happens, our brain, to protect us, doesn't fully process the memory. So, for people that have had extreme traumatic experiences who have post traumatic stress disorder, their brain will do everything it can to try to lock away that memory, even though you have different triggers that could be places, people, things that are associated with that memory. And every time you cross those things, you can get triggered and you kind of feel like your nervous system goes into fight or flight. You get sweaty palms, increased heart rate, really nervous, and you react in a way that just feels out of control and like you can't respond rationally. Without even knowing it, this is all sort of subconsciously happening. So what EMDR is set out to do is to allow people to bring up this memory in a safe place in therapy while using kind of a distraction at the same time. And while bringing up this memory in your mind and using the distraction, which is usually eye movement or it can be tapping, like we've had clients just do kind of side to side tapping before, or just the traditional eye movement side to side. And by doing that, it taxes the working memory. So you're thinking about the stimulation that's happening, the eye movement or the tapping, while also bringing up aspects of that memory. And in that way, your brain is able to take the memory out of that very emotional part and put it into more of the logical part and begin to process and put meaning into that memory. And so it's also integrating more of like an adaptive, positive belief into that memory rather than just leaving it as it is with a very negative, damaging belief. It's a very hard thing to explain, but kind of in a nutshell, that's what it does in a practical way.
I've also heard it said, and not a therapist, definitely not done EMDR training. I've also heard it say that it takes, like, trauma is an unresolved emotion where when you are recalling the emotion, it's like you're back in that moment. Your body or your mind or your brain genuinely thinks you are in that experience again.
Yeah.
And whether it's EMDR or other trauma response or trauma focused modalities, it's all about helping process that from it being unresolved to being resolved where you recognize that that event was terrible, but it's in the
Yeah.
past and you're no longer in that place of danger anymore.
Yeah, and having done EMDR before, it's really interesting how when you process the memories, they're still there. It's not like you get rid of the memories, but it feels like they don't matter as much anymore. The memories are not quite as emotive or significant or disturbing as they used to be.
Very interesting.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that. It's probably a good segue into the question that we hear a lot about resilience these days. Do you think that we're giving young people, teenagers, young adults, the right tools to actually build the resilience for life and the way that we're doing life these days?
Yes and no. I think that teens are very I think teens have a lot of opportunity nowadays to kind of be able to practice resilience, and I think they could do that through searching for a job or maybe getting their license or maybe, just having these little challenges or obstacles to overcome. I just think that, the one aspect that might be holding them back a little bit is at times parents don't always want to watch their kids fail or get hurt or
Mhm.
stumble through the obstacle. And in that practice, they seem to want, some of them, not all of them, seem to want to sort of coddle and protect their kids.
Sounds
Yes,
very
exactly.
noble.
Yes, yeah, and why wouldn't you want to? Your job as a parent, you kinda take it on, like, "My job is to protect this child, to
Yeah,
keep them from harm." But as they grow into teenagers, this is almost like a dress rehearsal for adult life.
right.
So not giving them these opportunities to try and fail or to pursue something and crash and burn is actually going to potentially pull them back a bit in young adulthood and not give them the chance to feel resilient enough to branch out and try new things and take on challenges.
That's interesting advice. So that in some ways,
Mhm.
parents' desire to care and create safety can
Mhm.
sometimes actually stifle a child or a teenager's ability to build that natural resistance, maybe in a supported environment.
Yeah, totally. It can be like a double-edged sword in a way,
It's interesting.
Mm.
If I could ask a follow-up question to that, it's what are some of the ways that you could, or what are some of the ways you could recommend to parents where they actually can build that supportive environment where they can build resilience? I guess this sounds terrible to say, but what are some of the ways that parents can support their children processing through failure, also avoiding that long-term potential trauma or irreparable pain that may have come from like a really bad failure?
Yeah, I think that having your kids, encouraging them to try new things is really gonna be helpful, and I mean, the one example that for some reason keeps popping up into my head is the driver's license thing, and I've just seen, like, a few teens who are like, "I do not wanna get my license. I'm so scared to drive in Calgary. I'm scared to, take the wheel and get out there," and so a lot of parents are like, "That's fine, like, I'll just keep driving you until you're graduated from high school." And that's a very noble, "I'll do this for you, I'll serve you in this way," and I think they're trying to serve their kids, they're trying to, be there for them, and I love that, but in this instance, I think that the kids then think, "Okay, well, if I don't face the challenge, it's something will work out," you know? Mom will come to the rescue, dad will come to the rescue, something will happen, but then they don't build that confidence of overcoming the anxiety, and the more you let anxiety go unchallenged or that fear go unchallenged, the stronger the fear will get. And so, not facing, for example, getting your driver's license, you're just perpetuating the fear and creating, an attitude in your kid of, well, I don't need to do this if I feel afraid of it or if I feel uncomfortable.
That's very interesting. I'm going to ask kind of a random question as a follow up.
Mm,
I've heard it described as
mm,
superhero syndrome, where a lot of kids grow up saying they don't have a specific talent or they don't have that special gifting. You'll
mm.
hear about that person who's really good at violin or something like that, and they go, "I don't have that." It means either I haven't discovered it or I just don't have it. I'm not like everyone else. Sounds like, we've been watching too many superhero movies. I wasn't bit by some bioengineered spider and I don't have all of these fancy skills or anything. But I mean, we realize that's not the reality. And the reality is that perseverance, resilience, progression, success is a journey. How do we help kids? How do we help teens? How do we help adults for that matter? Recognize that there's probably more capacity and competence within us than we realize.
Yeah. I mean, in a therapy capacity, I think recognizing that things are just gonna take time and practice, and I like that you brought that up because so many kids and teens, they want that instantaneous
Mm,
result, want that instant gratification of, if I watch a YouTube video, I should know how to be a maestro at the piano by the end of the day. And they want everything to happen so quickly, immediately, but they don't necessarily wanna put in the time that it takes to master a skill or to develop a superpower, you know? When most people that have those superpowers, yeah, they have some natural talent maybe, but then they also have cultivated that talent and worked on it and pushed through the boring and the mundane and the work to get to where they are. And so I think there's not like a cool answer. I wonder if it's just consistency and commitment to a goal or a value and then making choices, making decisions that are going to align with that goal and value and kind of get to where you want to go.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Malcolm Gladwell, interesting little fact here. Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers highlights the statement that to be a true expert in something, you have to spend 10,000 hours doing something. I mean, that's about 10 years worth of an average person's work life. And I
Wow.
think for a teenager, even as a 30-year-old, I go, wow, 10 years to become an expert in something. I guess
Yeah.
so. Maybe instead of thinking about how that's so long, maybe as Tier said, it's a bit of a different perspective of I have 10 years. I'm going to give myself that grace to be like, hey, I got 10 years. Like, this is what I really want to do. I got so much time before I really need to be competent and really capable in this. I'm going to transition the conversation if you don't mind, but some young people have really been struggling to put their feelings into words. This is something actually I've struggled even into my 30s. How do approaches like play therapy or mindfulness help process emotions differently?
Yeah, so with play therapy, you're kind of accessing a child's world. Because when you're a kid, their world is play. Everything is play. And so in order to even be able to figure out what's going on in their world and to be able to kind of speak to what they're going through, I find activating that in play, all of a sudden they're a lot more open to talking with you, to hearing what you have to say. And so, with emotions, for example, we could use Candyland as a game. And in Candyland, every time you land on a certain colored square, there's a question related to emotion. And it could be, for example, like, when was a time that you felt angry? How did you respond to anger? How did you know you were feeling anger? I try to get very somatic, like very physical in that way. It's like, where do you feel it in your body? Because kids, then when they connect the feeling, then they can say, okay, when I felt tightness in my chest, I knew I was anxious. Or when I felt like this heat in my head or like this clenching, like I knew I was angry. And sometimes kids, they kind of roll their eyes like, I don't want to keep identifying emotions. But what they're doing is they're actually building up their vocabulary and they're building up like self awareness as to like what they're feeling when they're feeling it. And once they do that, then they can build up tools of like, well, when I feel angry, I can go for a walk or I can count down from 10 or I can do some breathing, and that helps them recognize, oh, yeah, I am feeling this way. This is what I can do to try to react or respond to this emotion in a more healthy, constructive way. Yeah.
From some of our past conversations, I understand that's a technique you use with a lot of your clients. You'll give them homework coming out of sessions where you say, hey, like, you experienced this, practice this, and then they come back. What are some of the common responses when people come back after having practiced some of those different practices?
Like most common was, I tried it and it didn't work. I tried
How
it
many
and
times did you try it?
yeah, exactly. I tried it. I got really angry and I still wanted to punch my brother. I still like slammed the door. I still did this. So I think that's probably the most common response, and then they're like, "What do I do? Like, how do I fix this?" And so then we have to, like, slow it down. Like, emotion is not like thoughts. Our thoughts are in our head, and we move quite quickly with thoughts. When we're dealing with emotion, we come down into our chest, and we move a lot more slowly, and so I'll even talk more slowly and just try to, like, drag that process out a little bit so we can really feel that emotion. And what I'll do is I'll say, "Okay, no problem. That's not like you're failing, you're still learning." It's still just a part of the process, even though it seems like a failure. And we kind of set out what are your triggers? When is this happening the most often? And now your homework is the next time, to try just one of those things, and after kind of reiterating what the one thing is, then you kind of make this connection in your brain of like, when I feel angry and I'm triggered by my mom saying this to me, I'm not gonna do the original behavior, which is maybe like, I don't know, saying something rude and turning around, slamming the door, whatever the original behavior is. Instead, I'm gonna express myself like I just need a minute. I need a break. Communication is also kind of tied into that. I'm just kind of feeling really angry and I need a minute to.
Mm,
And so then we practice kind of expressing what's going on. And so it's not just like this reaction is happening. You are now self-aware of what's happening, and then you're able to express that to other people of, I'm just really angry right now. I need a minute to cool off.
Yeah. Follow-up question to that is, I think we all experience emotions that we're uncomfortable with.
Mhm.
What is it about some emotions that make us uncomfortable? We want to avoid it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to be triggered by emotion. What is that?
One of the things that it could be is we were told that emotion is unacceptable when we were
Mm,
children. So if anger was not allowed in your household, if you never saw your parents fight, if you never had conflict, if conflict was always swept under the rug and emotion was not tolerated in the form of anger, then
mm,
yeah, you kind of pick up this like subconscious belief of like, okay, anger is not acceptable. It's not allowed. Every time I feel anger, I'm bad. So then you hide it. You try to push it away. You try to
mm,
conceal it.
interesting. So there's like a negative connotation to this emotion, and that's what could make it very uncomfortable.
Yeah, totally. And if it does feel like physically uncomfortable, I mean, we're creatures of comfort. And anytime we feel discomfort, even if you go to the gym and you're working out and you feel discomfort, sometimes you do one less rep because you're just so uncomfortable. It's kind of the same with emotion. When you start to feel that discomfort, you're like, it just seems easier right now to avoid it and not deal with this. But the problem is over like emotions are communicators. And so the more you ignore them, the less information you have from them.
Fascinating. I really relate to the gym analogy. In my world, it's not one less rep. It's like, do I even bother getting out of bed and going to the gym?
Yes, that is the question.
Segue into a different question, which is, so family and school dynamics have significantly changed over the years. How can parents and educators best support children and teens' mental health?
I think there's two sides to that coin. And I say that because I've seen a lot more validation of mental health and mental health conditions these days entirely. And I want to say that that's good. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a really good thing because then there's been a lot more understanding for kids who do go through intense anxiety, depression. And when I say kids, I mean children and teenagers as well. I don't want to
Mhm.
exclude them. But I think now in some cases, it becomes a bit of a crutch. And I hear a lot of kids coming in saying, well, my anxiety, or my anxiety is doing this, or my anxiety won't let me take this test without, totally blanking and stuff. And it's like, okay, yeah, like you are experiencing some anxiety, but not all anxiety is bad. And anxiety itself is not a bad thing.
Right.
If you cross the street and a car starts coming towards you, you want to feel anxiety to get out of the way, to react, to
Right.
respond. But when anxiety is just like, well, now it's my anxiety, it's a part of me, and I'm
Mhm.
experiencing it all the time. And so I need to accommodate anxiety. That is me, and it almost it can become too much of a focus. And it can actually take away from facing the anxiety, from dealing with it, from doing something about it in a way.
A natural follow-up question to that, maybe slightly cynical, is, does it become part of who we are? Can it be resolved? Or is it something that's external to us?
I think is external. There's this one therapy that I'll quickly bring in called acceptance and commitment therapy. And the reason why I love it is it talks about creating diffusion. So sometimes we fuse to our thoughts, we fuse to our feelings, we become them and they become us. So I'm having this thought about I'm a bad person and we fuse with that and
Mm,
we start to really take it on as our identity. I'm having so much anxiety, I fuse to that and I take it on as my identity. Like I'm just an
wow.
anxious person. It's who I am. Yeah, this is because I'm feeling this. I am this. Or because I'm thinking this, I am this. When
Mm,
that's where like a lot of dysfunction comes in when you start partnering with those feelings and thoughts and you start to fuse to them because they're always going to be there, these thoughts and these feelings. And the more that we fuse with them, sometimes the more overwhelming they become and the harder it is to then detach ourselves from them and actually live less anxiously or stop believing that we're bad, you know?
right.
Because those things cause dysfunction and
Right.
dysfunctional behavior. we act in a way that's anxious. We act in a way that we think we're bad or we think something bad's going to happen. And so acceptance and commitment therapy is talking about let's create some distance, let's create space, let's
Mhm.
defuse from our thoughts and feelings and look at them. We can't get rid of them, but we can
Right.
see them and we can notice them, but we don't have to be attached to them. So I really like that therapy for that reason. It's not we're one with anxiety, and I we change the language. I try to get people to stop saying my anxiety or, my anxiousness. It's like, okay, anxiety. It's just anxiety. It's just the
Right.
emotion. And instead of thinking I'm bad, you kind of say I'm having this thought that I'm bad. So you become a little bit more of like an observer of yourself.
Right. The anxiety I'm experiencing.
Yeah, yeah, I'm feeling this anxiety, I'm experiencing anxiety. Doesn't mean
Mm.
it's yeah, or I'm anxiety, but there's a little more distance there.
Well, last question, shotgun question, really quickly. And this is probably the most philosophical question of them all, is if you could change one thing about how our society here in the Calgary area approaches youth mental health, what would it be?
I'm probably gonna wrestle with that question for quite a while and be
Mm.
thinking about it for the rest of the day because I don't know if there's one thing.
Mm.
Uh, I would say it is such a huge mixture of school, the way that schools are going now, pressure and expectation on teenagers to already have their life sorted out at this age. And I think the increase in mental health conditions around everybody also can kind of create some level of anxiety in itself, seeing everybody that has these conditions. But I think for Calgary specifically, Calgary is a very busy city and everybody is always on the go and there's so much to do and that's fantastic. But it also comes with a cost. And I think that if we truly want to regulate our nervous systems, we need space. We need time. We need downtime. We need rest. And we need to be able to take 10 where we're not doing anything. We're just
Mm.
being. And so I wonder if we really do have enough of that available to teens in this day and age. Constant access to phones, all the activities they're
Right.
going to, school, homework, whatever they're involved in. And I do wonder if we're actually creating enough space for their nervous systems to feel like they can be in rest and digest rather than fight or flight most of the time.
Wow. A great way to end this conversation. Great philosophical thought there. If you want to connect with Alicia, she's an incredible therapist here in the city of Calgary. You can find her at our website, or you can connect with her, our team here at the website masterscounseling.com. Feel free to give us a call. Thank you so much, Alicia, for your time. It was a privilege to get to know you better.
Absolutely is my privilege.